Greetings to everyone with us. On behalf of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, I would like to welcome you to the first lecture of JP2 Lecture series this academic year. The series is organized by the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture, which is part of our Faculty of Philosophy here at Angelicum. Today's lecture, as well as the entire JP2 Lecture series, could not have taken place without the support of our university authorities, whom I would like to thank. Special thanks are also owed to the founders of the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture, the donors and supporters of the Institute, our audience, and all viewers in front of the screens. The St. John Paul II Institute of Culture was established to look the challenges facing the modern world and the Church in light of the thought and heritage of St. John Paul II. The idea of thinking with John Paul II has been embodied in the cyclical JP2 Lectures given by prominent interdisciplinary scholars who revisit the extraordinary contributions of John Paul II for our own day. Today, it's my great honor to introduce to you Professor Jean-Luc Marion, a premier French philosopher and theologian, former student of Jacques Derrida, whose work is informed by patristic and mystical theology, phenomenology, and modern philosophy. Professor Marion has held chairs at both the Sorbonne and the University of Chicago. This semester, we are fortunate to also host him for the second time as visiting professor at the Angelicum. In 2020, he was awarded the Ratzinger Prize for his lifetime achievements in theology. He also received the 1992 Grand Prix du Philosophie de l'Académie Française and the 2008 Karl Jaspers Prize. In November 2008, Professor Marion was elected as an immortel by the French Academy. He has occupied seat 4, an office previously held by the late Cardinal Jean-Marie Lustiger. His many books include God Without Being, Prolegomena to Charity, and Being Given Toward a Phenomenology of Givenness. Today, Professor Marion will present a lecture entitled Question of Being and Revelation. Given that according to the metaphysical tradition, the question of being comes first, as a background for the questions of the existence of God, our special guest asked the following question: could it be possible, according to biblical revelation, to reverse the order and to consider being from the viewpoint of God, the Creator? Professor Marion, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm glad and honored to be invited again in this prestigious university. And I would like to give a sketch of one of the conclusions of one of my last published book. The English title is Revelation Comes from Elsewhere. As you explained the point, my hypothesis is this. In the history of modern Christian theology, it is taken for granted that we should consider, as the metaphysics did, everything as a being. And so if we focus on the case of God, we should indeed consider God in its own way of being, and discuss whether he is the most perfect being, the first being, the creator, the esse, the ipsum esse, and so on, which is perfectly legitimate. No question about that. But immediately, and Thomas Aquinas was the first to be fully aware of this issue, if we consider God against the background of the question of being, die Seinsfrage, to speak as Heidegger did, we have to face the difficulty to point out the very special, the very divine way of being of God, which should, by definition, be quite different of the way of being of any other thing. And the Distinctio Realis by Thomas Aquinas is the best example of the answer to this difficulty. But in the modern or postmodern time, the question of being has taken a new phase, because we are in the time of nihilism. Nihilism means that everything which we can say about being depends of our evaluation. So things have no being in by themselves. Their being, their degree of being, so to speak, is seen as a result of the evaluation. To speak like Nietzsche, the evaluation, Wertung, which is made by the will to power, Will zur Macht. And in fact, it is not only a philosophical statement, it is a way we can describe our daily world, where everything has a value, and when and where this value is established by, we can say, by the market, by the producer, by the technology, by the corporations, by the public, and things are only insofar as they are evaluated, they get a value. And the value is not, it is not up to the thing to decide its value, it is up to the evaluator. That is, the human mind, the social authorities, the economical powers. So the question of being is itself more problematic today than it was ever. So to ask the question of being about God becomes even more difficult than ever, because we don't, I would say, we don't trust being anymore. To use a formulation by Nietzsche, what we call being is only, I read, the last wisp of evaporating reality. Letzten Rauch der verdunstenden Realität. It is in Götzendämmerung, the twilight of idols, section Die Vernunft in das Philosophie, section 4. So is there another way to connect the question of God to the, I would say, vanishing or damaged definition of being. That's the problem. We are not in the situation of Thomas Aquinas, who could rely on a very strong concept of being, of ousia, by opposition to accident, and so on. Today, we have lost a real trust in the ousia of the things, nihilism. So there is many different answers to this kind of question. I suggest a reversal of the position of the question, starting from a theological point of view and not an ontological point of view. We're trying to reach an ontological point of view, starting from a theological point of view. Let us make the first step. It is a fact that in the New Testament, we have no sentence and no theory of being. And in particular, it is very rare, I shall give examples, to have the Greek verb einai, to be. There are very few occurrences of einai, to be. Most of the use of the infinitive einai are in fact abbreviate predications. It is esti or eimi or something. It is the predicative use of the verb to be. But it is the normal daily life use of to be. But about einai, we have roughly no item of it. Same thing for ousia. There is, we shall see that, there is only one use of ousia in the New Testament. So we could say, after all, there is no matter for a discussion of being from a theological, biblical point of view. There is none. Not completely. There is a text, a very famous text. We don't know who has written this text. It is quoted by Paul in the Epistle to the Philippians too. Perhaps Paul is simply quoting again an hymn which was sung in the celebration, liturgical celebrations. We don't know exactly who the author is. It is not a point, after all. I read this text, and you know it perfectly well. It is in Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 to 11. He, though he was in the form of God, in morphe theou uparkon, did not regard as a possession to snatch and defend, if we can try translate arpagmon this way, I shall comment that. He did not regard as a possession to be equal with God. To einai isa theo. To einai isa theo. This is the only obvious use of the infinitive of to be in the text. But he emptied himself, eoton ekenosen, taking the form of a slave, morphen to theou, doulou, becoming in likeness to men, and homoiomati anthropon genomenos, and found as a man by his figure schemati, euretes os anthropos. There is indeed a very long and detailed discussion about the correct translation of the term of morphe, is there form, condition, of uparkein, either exist, subsist, and so on. But those discussions are not the first issue here. Because clearly, all the usual terms take a new meaning in the context of the hymn. The real point is to understand the connection between the first part of the hymn and the second part. Because Christ shifts from one morphe, morphe theou, to another, morphe anthropo. And in this way, he is seen in his figure, schema, external figure, as a man. And he is doing this by obedience to it. Obedience to the sacrifice on the cross and to death. And the text keeps going by saying, God highly exalted him and gave to him the gracious gift of the name that is above every name. Alors, gracious gift, to translate, ekarisato. He gave as a grace, as a gift, the name, so that at this name, Jesus, every knee should bend in heaven, on earth, and in hell, and every tongue confess ex homologesetai, Jesus, Lord, to the glory of the Father. What is clear, at least, is that the kenosis is the first moment of the exaltation, of the gift of the name which is above any other name. So there is a sacrifice which is accepted and leads Jesus to have again, to receive again what he has sacrificed. We could say this is forgiveness. A point. We should take very seriously two connected concepts leading to a third concept through all the Bible. We have the concept of sacrifice. Sacrifice, indeed, is to give up something, to destroy something for the sake of God. But in fact, this is only the pagan understanding of sacrifice. The biblical meaning of sacrifice is that you receive something from God. It can be a cattle, it can be anything, it can be your son, and you give it back to God, which means that you recognize that you don't possess by yourself. You just give back what you have previously received. So the sacrifice, and it's why there is no need for Abraham to slaughter his son. What is at stake is to make clear that this son is not his son. He could not produce his son. He was too old for that, and so on. So it is a pure gift given by God. And so when he accepts to give back his son, not necessarily to slaughter his son, he is acknowledging that he receives that from God. So the sacrifice brackets, so to speak, the object of sacrifice in order to make appear again, or perhaps for the first time, that this thing was given. So it is a way to recognize the gift and the giver, God. Same thing, forgiveness. Forgiveness, what is it? you behave against the will of God. And instead of eliminating you, God decides to forgive. What does that mean, to forgive? That means to give again what was given and was despised by me. So forgiveness is to redouble the gift in order to constrain the givee to admit that there was a gift. In sacrifice and forgiveness understood that way, it is very clear that what is at stake is not what you give up or what you receive for a second time. It is to make the relation between the giver and the givee visible again, or in fact for the first time. And the result of this dialectic of the sacrifice and forgiveness leads to what we should call the communion. The communion is the fact that the exchange, even if the exchange is made by the means of something given and something given back and so on, the exchange itself is precisely the exchange, the pure exchange, the communion between the two, which is the case in Trinity, indeed, but also in our daily life. There is a communion when the gift is only the occasion for the recognition of the gift, either by the givee, it is sacrifice, or by the giver, and it is forgiveness. So the structure of the hymn in the Philippians is precisely the fact that Jesus gave up his morphe theou to the point to die on the cross by pure obedience, not my will, but thine, and is forgiven, so to speak, because what he has given up is given to him in abundance and on an hyperbolic way. It's glorification. But his glorification is now explained as the result of the Eucharistein of Jesus by the Father. This is very strange, this use of Eucharistein in that case. Eucharisato. The Father gives him the charis of the name which is above any other name. In the usual use of Eucharistein, it is the community of believers that make an Eucharistia to God, to the Father. In the Holy Mass, it is our Eucharistein to the Father, through the Son. In this case, it is the Father, God, which make a charis to Jesus. In other texts, in John in particular, it is the fact that the Father glorifies the Son at the same moment that the Son glorifies the Father. This is pure communion. So, what does that mean about einai? We have this formulation, einai iso theo. To be equal to God. It is not a noun in the Greek pagan literature. We find that, to my knowledge, according to the dictionaries, 3 times in Homer. One in the Iliad, Song 9, verse 603, and in the Odyssey 11, 304, and 15, 520, where some heroes, Greek heroes, are so exalted and full of pride and glorious that they appear or claim to be equal to God. But indeed, it is an illusion. They are not equal to God. And this formulation, to be equal to God, so it is, I would say, it is the hubris of the hero. And Jesus was accused to claim to be equal to God, to have the same einai than that of God. And the texts are very clear. Let us read some of them. In the Gospel according to John, 10:30, God, when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, the answer immediately from the audience is to say that they sought to kill him because of his blasphemy. Blasphemy, because, I quote, because you, being a man, make yourself God. Su anthropos, on, poies theoton theos. And we have in John 5:18 the same attack against Jesus. This is why the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but called God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Ison eoton poion to theo. And it is astonishing that we have this is the same expression than that in the hymn in the Philippians. May I make a wicked and ill-intentioned footnote here. Why the biblical scholars does not point out this, that the eina equal to God, isatoteo, can be found in Paul and in John. But many biblical scholars assume that indeed Paul has not read John, or John has not read Paul, or until two different words. Not on that point. In fact, we should refer to John to understand the verse quoted by Paul in the Epistle to the Philippians. And again, at the very end of the life on earth of Jesus, when he is condemned by the great priest, it is about being equal to God. This is the crime. I quote, see John 19:17. We have a law, and by that law, told the Grand Prêtre, the great priest, and by that law, he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God. Oti huion teu eoton epoiesen. It is very clear the reason why Jesus was condemned and criticized before was exactly the fact that he asked vi einai issa theo. And de facto, when he says in Matthew 11, that is same in Luke 10, all things had been delivered to me by the Father, or in Matthew 27:43, for I said, I am the Son of God, or in the famous text of John 4:26, I who speak to you, I am He, the Messiah. Or John 14:10, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Clearly, Jesus could claim vi einai issa theo. Should we conclude that he was rightly condemned? And there is a logic in that. And we should not underestimate this logic. But there is a word we have not yet analyzed. Vi issa, vi einai, vi to einai issa theo, is not kept by Jesus. We have seen that Jesus has said, I am in the Father, and the Father is with me. So, what does that mean? That he has not kept to einai issa theo. The text says very precisely, he did not regard as an arpagmon to be equal with God. That is, in the mind of Christ, to einai issa theo is not an arpagmon. What is an arpagmon? To make a long story short, for those who have read Molière, l'avare is, the name is arpagon. Arpagmon means the possession you achieve by violence, by force. It can go to murder, it can lead to murder, it can mean to rape, it can mean to possess, and to possess in such a way that you can destroy everything to possess that, and perhaps even destroy what you possess. And we have many other items of this arpagmon in the New Testament. For instance, when Paul is lifted up to the third or seventh sky, it is by arpagmon, rape, like in Greek mythology. When the violent take over the realm of God, it is by arpagmen. And we have another very important point. When in John, Jesus criticized the Jews by saying to them, you are so proud of being the descent of Abraham that you possess this, and you imagine that it gives you the right to be the wise and to be saved at any price. Ici, Jesus says that they are, in fact, using the descendants from Abraham as a way to seek for glory, and I quote John 33 and the rest. You are of your father the devil, and your will is to carry out your father's greediness. The greediness, epitumias, the desire, it is the desire of the arpagmon. So the Pharisees consider the fact that they are son of Abraham as an arpagmon, as something they will never give up. And they will make everything to keep it. And with that, that's enough. They are with Abraham in the eternity. So the point is, between Jesus and the Jews, that they have all of them, both, some einai, Isa, Theo. Jesus referring to his father, the Jews, the Pharisees, referring to Abraham. What is the difference? Is that this qualification for salvation, for union with God, is taken by the Pharisees as an arpagmon and is given up by Jesus because it is an arpagmon. That is, Jesus considers that what makes the price, the richness, the greatness of being the son of the Father is not his own possession, his own right. It is the fact that it is given to him by the Father. The privilege is not the object of the gift, it is the process of the gift itself. So, Jesus is not jealous of his einai, Isa, Theo. The Pharisees are jealous of the possession of being the descent of Abraham. And this, so the opposition is not whether you are equal to God. It is the way you are it. Is it because you possess something and you are, to some extent, as in some modern mythology, you are equal to God and you can give up God because you are God? That is, in fact, the first temptation of Adam and Eve in paradise. You will be as God is God, you will be. So you can give up God himself, arpagmon. You can know perfectly well that you are the Son of God and don't claim to possess this filiation. But admit that you receive it. It is a gift. And a gift you receive from God should be given back to God. This is exactly what Jesus did. And if the gift is given back, sacrifice, it will be given back again, forgiveness, and without measure. So, the exaltation is exactly the reverse, in better than the renunciation. And what appears is precisely the pure communion between the Father and the Son. They are not equal by the same right as if Jesus would be the next king after the death of his father. In our system of power, the son will be the next king after the death of the father. In the case of God, they are forever the Father and the Son, and the best evidence of that is that they are changing places every time, without arpagmon. What does that mean about the question of being? About the question of being, this means a lot of things. It means that to einai, and we can bracket the isateo, to einai in general, is what we don't possess. Thomas Aquinas has said that at least once, when he says that the actus essendi for us come aliunde, from elsewhere. We don't possess the actus essendi. We have an essentia, but the actus essendi is beyond our grasp. So although we may claim that we have an ousia, a substantia, an essentia, call it in many different ways. But the core of being, which is the actus essendi, is beyond our possession. The hymn in the Philippians says precisely this. The einai is not a possession by Christ. And we can say that this to einai, and once again, to my knowledge, it is the only place in the New Testament where we have the infinitive to einai. With the, as I say, the non-predicative meaning to be something, or I am myself, I am male, I am white, and so on, but to be, the existential meaning of to be. This is the only case where we have to einai in the New Testament. And in that case, to einai, in the case of Jesus, is to einai isateo, equal to God. But in general, it is to einai. To einai is not what we can possess and we can claim for ourselves. And the illusion is that we could possess the to einai. It is a long question whether some philosophers had the illusion to possess to einai. As an historian of philosophy and specialized in Descartes, it is a key question about the ego cogito. In fact, I think that Descartes was wise and Christian enough not to have that claim. But this is another point. But there are many philosophers who have no doubt that they are by themselves. They are causa sui. So it is ridiculous if you think seriously what it means. But it was said. I have a name of someone that looking back to him in time, we can friendly mock, which is Sartre, indeed. We are not by ourselves. We are not causa sui. We are not causa sui. And Jesus is very clear about this. And we can now perhaps take more seriously some words said by Jesus. Matthew 18:4. Whoever humbles himself like this child, he is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. To humble itself, etapainosen eoton, can be found again in the hymn in the Philippians. He has humbled himself to the point, to death, to the cross, on the cross. It is exactly what Jesus said about the child. Why the children are closer to the realm of God than we are? Because they are humble. And to be humble means that if you want to be the first, you must be the last. Mark 9:35. And it is not an analogy of the weakness. It is an analogy of the fact that we should be aware that we don't possess our being. The problem is that depossession is the real relationship we have to our being, not possession. It's why the children, which when they will grown up, will try to possess, indeed, everything, including their being. The temptation is universal. They have the privilege that they cannot, during a period, the first year, avoid that they are deprived of any possession. And this is why they are an example for us. So this logic of depossession is key in our dealing with our being. And let us take another example. Jesus on the cross is asked by the two, how do you say that, the two bad guys, you have saved others, save yourself. Matthew 27:40. Soson seoton. So why Jesus has not saved itself? Why it would have been a triumph to go down from the cross and save itself, to be a triumph for men, it will be a disaster for the economy of salvation. Why? Because Jesus would have done what every man would have done, that is, have repossessed his own being. And what was at stake for him on the cross was to make clear that he couldn't give up the possession of his own being because it is a gift, and a gift should be given back and received again. So he was making obvious that he could give up everything because the Father would forgive him and give him again everything. So what was at stake is to make, by bracketing his own toeinai, the fact that the toeinai is a gift a charis from the Father. But to make clear that the toenai is a charis from the Father, you have first to give up the possession of the toenai. It is very clear. Don't save yourself. You cannot save yourself because you had never the right to claim your being. So we could take the example of many texts from the letter to the Hebrew, chapter 5 and 10. But I go to my last point. The gift is the mean for us, by bracketing it, sacrifice, to receive it obviously as a gift from the Father, forgiveness. That is to manifest in full clarity, full glory, would be better, the communion. Which means that there is no God is free from being. And we have to imitate God by being free from the possession of our being. That God is free from being, it is not, it is in fact a quotation. Many of you, among you, has recognized that, a quotation from Schelling. He says that in the case of God, we have to understand that we have to desacralize the being of God. Entehrlichen. Gottes sein. Not because God is not, but because God gives being. Being is the first gift, perhaps, given by God to those who are not God. But God is beyond all his gifts. And the holiness of God cannot be described just by emphasizing the first gift given by God. What makes the holiness of God visible is the fact that everything is given. Every gift and thing rightly given comes from above. Jacques, Epistle of Jacques. This means that we should be free from the question being or not. Hamlet says, to be or not to be, this is the question. This is not a Christian word. For us, the point is not to be or not to be. Because to be as a possession, a pagmon, is a way to miss the gift of God. And not to be may well lead to receive the gift of God. So there is a neutrality of being what is at stake in being is the way we get it. And this is my last point. It is very, very surprising that Paul, in two texts, uses another very philosophical and Greek formulation about being. There is only one item of to be in Philippians 2. But there is two cases where we have meon and meonta, the non-beings, the either pure nothingness or the things which are not. And those two texts are first, 1 Corinthians 1:28. God chose ta meonta, the non-beings, to nullify ta onta. So we have ta meonta, ta onta. It is Greek philosophy, pure. And God is able to, is translated to annul or to nullify. Well, the Greek is stronger. It is katargese. Katargesein means to erase, to make ridiculous, to put away, to destroy, to disqualify. To disqualify. And so God has chosen those who are not in order to disqualify those who are. That means that he has elected the poor, illiterate people working in the harbor of Corinth to create the community of the saints, and not the well-educated people, the wealthy people, and so on. So why God can do that against all the rules, the political rules, the moral rules, and I would say the philosophical rules? Because, second quotation, which is in Romans 4:11. God, who gives life to the dead and calls the non-beings as well as the beings. Teu tu zo poiuntos tus necrus, kai kaluntos ta me onta os onta. God can make alive those who are dead. Resurrection, that is creation. God is not submitted to the opposition between nothingness and being. Against what? Against, for those who have studied Parmenides, against the fragments 6 and 7 of the poem of Parmenides, who says explicitly, don't try to think and to know what is not. It is not possible. God is not submitted to this principle, which is the ground principle of Greek philosophy. That is, we can think and deal only with what is and not what is not. God can deal the same way and with complete indifference with what is not and with what is. Creation ex nihilo, resurrection. It is not an issue for God. It is an issue for us, not for God. This God, which is indifferent to the difference between being and not being. This God which is indifferent to the ontological difference. We may say that. This God is able to call the non-being os as in quantum quatenus, we can try als, we can translate that in all the language, as if they were. God can translate the non-being, ta meonta, as if they were beings. How does God do that? By calling, kalein, kaluntos to meonta os onta. He can call. God can call what is not in order, not only as being, but in order to make it appear as being, which is exactly in Ezekiel, the dead bones which are called to be lifted up and alive again. So, to the young girl, stand up, the call, Lazarus, stand up. So, the characteristic of God, that is, he can call. He creates from nothingness by calling. Calling the light, calling the sea, calling the earth, calling man. And the call is precisely the first gift. So, this means that we, we can understand being starting from the indifference of God to being and not being much more than we can reach God starting from being. Heidegger repeatedly, and although he was a genius, this is not the question, but he has said some huge blunders. And one of them is to say, when I discuss with a friend who is a theologian, Catholic theologian, about God and being, the answer is that being is ans creatum, being created. For a Christian, being is to be created. And Heidegger says this is a way to shut the discussion, to close the problem, and to avoid the difficulty. Creation is the denial of the Seinsfrage. I think it is completely wrong. Creation is the real meaning of being from a biblical point of view. To be means that we are from elsewhere. That is, we are from elsewhere. We cannot consider being as our question. It is our gift. And there is no answer if by answering you make sure that you understand you possess your own being. We don't possess our being, and it is precisely this which is a characteristic of our way of being. And we should have, I would say, an ontological reading of formulation by Paul. Paul says, 1 Corinthians 4:7, Tide ekeis o houk elabes. What do you possess which you have not received? What do you possess which you are not received? This is not true only for all the gifts we can receive from God or from anyone. It is first true about our being. The being, our being, the art of our condition, is what we have received. And to disconnect the question of being from the gift of being is not only a denial of biblical revelation, it is perhaps a misunderstanding of the philosophical question of being. At least this is my hypothesis. I thank you for your attention.
Professor Marion, thank you very much for a splendid lecture. And now we have time for questions. So please use the microphones and use them close your mouth.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, I have a lot of questions, as I'm sure many do, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. We're celebrating the anniversary of the Council of Nicaea this year. And one of the distinctions that's so important to the fathers is that we are adopted sons, and Jesus is a natural son. This natural filiation is not something that Jesus receives in the same way that we receive our adopted sonship. He's natural. He's from origin, son. He says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord, and I can take it up again. So I wonder if this distinction, and I think it can, but I would just like to hear you say how it can make this distinction between Jesus as natural son versus our adopted sonship. It doesn't seem to me that we can say that it's just because he realizes the gift. He understands what it means to be the gift. And so he can sort of psychologically lay down his life in order to receive it back again. There has to be something more than that. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed. I think we could perhaps use another formulation without contradiction. We are not adopted son. Because we were not son before the adoption. Naturally speaking, we don't behave as sons. It is like the parable of the father with two sons. When the younger son decided to fly out, asking to get his share of the inheritance. Very clearly, he decided not to be a son anymore. And when he was far away and starving to death, at that moment, when he decided to come back to his home, it is without claiming to be a son. He is only a slave, a servant. So we are not adopted son. It is only if we are adopted that we start to be son. It's the first slight modification I would make. It is very difficult to be a son. Because to be a son, you have to admit that you are not the origin of yourself. And we all are fascinated by this silly dream to be a self-made man. What is it to be an adult? It is perhaps to have given up the ambition to be a self-made man. And when a guy boasts to be a self-made man, you can suspect that he is a teenager, an old teenager, but a teenager. So to admit that we are not self-made is very difficult. Is Jesus a natural son? He's a supernatural son. Nature is not enough. And he is son by grace, because grace is more powerful than nature. The nature of God is grace. He has no other nature than grace. So he is graciously Son from the beginning and throughout. So I'm reluctant to assume an obvious meaning of nature and to use it about God. God is not supernatural, it is inadequate as well. God is grace, and everything is by grace. So the filiation of Jesus is by grace. That's why he gave up his filiation to get it back. Not in an exchange, but by a redoubling of grace.
Thank you, Professor. Would it be fair to say that the way to defeat nihilism is to pay attention to the fact that revelation comes from elsewhere, thereby stripping us of our modern assumption that all meaning is created by man, and removing the hubris involved in thinking ourselves akin to demiurges? Is not the spontaneity and perfection of God's revelation not proof of our inability to create being by the mere bidding of our evaluative powers? Is it the case that by sacrificing this godly vision of ourselves, we receive the gift of God?
What is your question?
Do we get the gift of God by sacrificing this vision of ourselves as able to create meaning, as you said in the beginning, by our evaluative powers, this modern assumption of nihilism?
I mean, the problem with sacrifice is that the sacrifice has a bad reputation. Because spontaneously to sacrifice is to lose something. In fact, sacrifice should be a pleasure and a joy. We should enjoy sacrifice. So why we don't enjoy sacrifice spontaneously? Because we see the sacrifice from the point of view of arpagmon, of possession. That is, we see that we shall not be allowed to enjoy something. So it is a loss. But the real sacrifice is the fact that we shall get, instead of the thing which will be given up or bracketed or put aside, we shall see the process of giving, which has made this thing at our disposal. That is, a possession. Walking in the street, I find out a piece of gold. Bon. So the question is, what is that? So I can take the piece of gold, put it in my pocket, it is a possession. But I can, because I'm well-educated, honest, fair, good citizen, I go to the police office, I say, I found this piece of gold, I put the piece of gold on the desk, and the real possessor of the piece of gold come back, and it is a very wealthy man who is so charmed by how fair I was. He gave me a huge amount of pieces of gold. So there is a gift. And this rich man discovers that I'm a brilliant guy, a good guy, and he makes me his adopted son. So I have a communion instead to have a possession. With my one piece of gold, I could not make big things. But instead of the possession, I have now a communion. This is much more, much unexpected, much grateful. So, in fact, the sacrifice is a good bargain. Because you exchange the result of the gift by the access to the giver. It is a good deal. And it's why the people who achieve a sacrifice the right way are the winner. So the more you sacrifice, the more you win. But this appears after many experiences, many attempts. Because when we start, we are not convinced that it is a good deal to make a sacrifice. In fact, it is. But we are not used to that. So we grasp the possession, and we don't want to leave it back. We prefer the possession without a giver to the dispossession with access to the giver. And I would say the strange behavior of the obvious saints is based on that. They do that, they make sacrifices because they know that it is the best thing they can do for themselves. They are egoistic, selfish, in fact, in their way.
Thanks, Professor. I have so in God and Jesus Christ reveals himself indifferent to the question of being, of possessing being. But of being, name, obviously parallels with Exodus chapter 3, when God reveals his name to his people. And in Greek, that's translated ego eimi ho on. Is that Greek a a fundamental mistranslation where God reveals himself as the being one? Or is there a different way to understand?
Good old question. First, this is the translation of the Septuaginta. As you know, the Hebrew has no own. The Eye Asher Eye can be translated as the future, can mean I am who I am and you are not supposed to know more than that. Can be I shall always be with you. And all those meanings has to be kept together. But the interesting point is that when Moses pushed God a bit further, telling you should tell me more to convince not only Pharaoh but the people that you are with me, the answer is I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's it. So God gave his name. He gives no definition of himself. And this is an anthropological paradox as well. Because when I am in a close relationship to another one, he gave me his name, and I did the same, but I have no definition of him or her. And perhaps it is a condition of an enduring relationship not to know completely the other, to have no definition of the other. That means that the relationship can keep going. And so you know, in philosophy, it is, you know, this classical aporia, medieval aporia, that the individual cannot be defined. The individual cannot be defined. It is true for this glass of wine, this glass of water. In fact, there are two of them. You cannot define one from the other. No, it is. So we have no need, we have no more need of definition of God by being than we have need of a definition of the privileged other in a relationship by being. In fact, being plays no role in a relation of friendship or love. There is much more than being at stake. So we should not overestimate the meaning and the importance of being. And as an historian of philosophy, I am a philosopher by education, and historian of philosophy. you have in mind the famous sentence of Aristotle in Metaphysics Zeta. Tito on. E tis eusia. What is being, that is, what is the essence or substance? This is the question which was asked from the beginning many times, and which is always without answer. And we can say that Heidegger started with that, with the question of being is the philosophical question, yes, and it is always without answer. And never forget that Thomas Aquinas said that the ipsum esse is penitus incognitum. Contragentes 1:48, 1:48, if I remember well. So being is incognitum. And I think there is perhaps a good reason for that. And this is a theoretical reason. That is, being depends on creation and not the reverse. And not the reverse. Being results from creation. We have to be consistent. When Heidegger says that the Dasein, which is the being among the beings, which are most qualified to ask the question of being, is finite, and is online with Kant, with Descartes, with all the great philosophers to say that. So we have a finite access to being, to the point that Heidegger says at the end of his Kant book, Kant und das Problem Metaphysik, the last section, that being itself is finite. Being itself is finite. In this case, I completely agree with Heidegger. Being is finite. Why? Because being results from creation, and not the reverse. So, to claim to have access to God through the lens, so to speak, of being, I have my doubts. If God is God, he is far beyond our grasp. So what is far beyond our grasp? It is the gnosis tes agapes teu hyperbaluses passin gnosin. Paul, Éphésiens. Epistle to the Ephesians 3, I think. The knowledge of the grace, the charis of God, which is hyperbolical and beyond any knowledge, any gnosis. Perhaps with the charis, we have an access to God. And being appearing as an effect of the charis of God. We can understand being from the viewpoint of the charis, not the reverse. That's the point. And the question of creation is not a philosophical category. It is a theoretical category. It's absolutely central. There was no creation for pagan philosophy. for good reasons. And it remains, how to say that, a point among philosophers. Some philosophers admit creations and some did not. And it is absolutely central. And Hegel, for instance, was always on the verge of admitting creation, but reintegrating creation in a kind of mythology where creation, evil, and the plurality of the person in Trinity went together and was a result of the action of the negative. So to have a strong view of creation is possible only in a strong and correct theology.
So there will be the last 3 questions, but please short questions.
Okay, yeah, today we spent a lot of time talking about like reversing that order to like consider being God as first, being first or God first. We spent a lot of time on that, reversing that order, and in the process we also spent a lot of time on Philippians 2 and on John 10, which to me are fundamental. They're fundamentally Christological passages in the Bible. So I was wondering, like, can you give us a little bit of an excursion or a little bit of insight into, like, using today's, what we have done today, and look into other topics. What I'm thinking about in particular is Trinitarian theology, and talk a little bit about Trinity, like how, because I think it's kind of revolutionized how we look at Trinity if we're taking what we have today in today's lecture as a sort of a starting point, at a point of departure. I'm
sorry, but I don't understand your point. I don't know whether you speak to...
To be really concise, I'm just interested in hearing more about using the conclusion that we have today and to look at Trinitarian theology and the Trinity. Like what? Is there any new insight that we can have?
About Trinity?
Yes, about the Trinity, yes.
Yes, I have no time to answer your question, but I think that theology, Christian theology has already developed 2 models to understand Trinity. One which is an ontical model using ousia, hypostasis, persona, substantia, and so on. And another, more recently, would say, starting with Hegel, which is an historical model. Perhaps it started earlier. You can discuss that. There are some texts of Gregory of Nazianz and others, but mostly up to Rahner and the successor of Rahner and things like that. I think there is perhaps a possible third model, which is about phenomenology, based on the fact that as Saint Basil of Caesarea says in the treatise on the Holy Spirit, there is only one form in Trinity, one visible form in Trinity, which is the form of the Son, of Jesus. And according to, in fact, the theology of John, mostly he who sees correctly Jesus sees him as the Son of the Father and sees the Son. Who sees me sees the Father. And this is made possible. So there is only one face of God, face of the Father. It is the face of Jesus. So you can say that we see the Father, although the Father remains invisible. Or to speak like Paul in 1 Colossians 1:15, Christ is the eikon tou theou tou aoratu. The icon of the invisible God, which is commented by Origen, who says it is the invisible icon of the invisible God. Well, you can discuss that. But Augustine says that there is a visible Son and an invisible Son, both. It's the same question. And the Holy Spirit is the director of the movie, which is not on stage, but back behind the viewer and making the viewer be on the right angle, the right direction to see through the face of the Son, the invisible face of the Father. So this is a phenomenological or phenomenal model of Trinity. I think it is more than promising. And now I'm trying to work it out. Because indeed, there is no adequate model to understand Trinity. But we know better now the limits of the two first. So there is room for other attempts.
Okay, bonsoir, Professor. I'm here. My question is too short. I came here just to know if you agree with Albert Camus on his idea of revelation.
No, I don't.
Yes.
Now,
maybe. Yeah, I would like to know if you agree with Albert Camus about his idea of revelation, because philosophically, most important book of him is L'Homme Révolté, The Rebel, and he shows us inevitably revelation leads to tyranny.
No.
No?
Could you tell me, because I don't understand. What is the question? No.
French? No, I don't know French. No, because Albert Camus wrote a book, means L'Homme Révolté in French, original. Because in English it's not famous. You don't know?
I have to admit that I'm not, at this moment, completely aware of what he said. But I'm afraid that it was not very up to the point.
Okay.
You know, the difficulty about, in general, the question of revelation is that it was understood because of some theologians, to be fair. It was understood mostly as another source of information about God than that of natural reason, as they say. And in fact, revelation is much more than that. Revelation is not another additional truth compared to all the natural truths discovered by sciences. It is some a manifestation which cannot describe according to the common understanding of truth. That is, it is not an aletheia, truth. It is an apocalypsis, as we said, a discovery. That is, you have to destroy some resistance to what manifests itself. In truth, natural truth, the more we have a manifestation, the better it is. We are immediately convinced because it is clear and distinct. In the case of revelation, the more the thing itself manifests itself, the more it is difficult to accept it. So it is quite a different logic. This is another story, not for this evening.
So once again, thank you very much, Professor Marion. Thank you to all of you present here in Angelicum. And if we have connection, internet connection, thank you to all of you in front of your screens. And our next conference on faith and reason in the light of the legacy of John Paul II will be held here at Angelicum on Tuesday, November 26, with special guest, Professor Richard Swinburne. Thank you very much.
And for the students, tomorrow morning, 8:30.